You've likely heard these words before, spoken in an interview that seemed to stop a nation and echo around the world. I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts. To many it sounded like a beautiful, gentle wish, but to understand what I truly meant, you have to see it as something deeper. It wasn't just a wish, it was the expression of a profound truth I had discovered. I wasn't only sharing a dream, I was revealing a private realization, born from a life lived in a gilded cage. In many ways I was setting the course for my own future. This is the story of what those words truly meant.
This is the story of why, when I was confronted by the strict traditions of an ancient institution, I chose a different kind of queendom. I knew I would never be Queen of England, but being an outsider pushed me to lead not with power, but with heart. It's also the story of how true human connection became my most powerful and lasting purpose. To understand my choice, we need to start at the beginning, like a fairy tale. Picture a shy 19-year-old girl suddenly thrust into the global spotlight. The dress, the grand cathedral, and that unforgettable kiss on the balcony.
It was a spectacle of dreams, and for a moment the world believed it. I wanted to believe it too. Coming from a family divided by divorce, my greatest hope was to create a loving home and finally feel secure. But even a gilded cage is still just a cage. This fairy tale quickly revealed its sharp edges. The moment I stepped behind palace walls, I found myself in a world ruled by silence and unspoken rules. There was an emotional chill I couldn't understand, especially as someone who feels things deeply. It was a strange paradox to be surrounded by history and grandeur, and yet feel completely unseen. My own lineage, it turned out, meant very little. What really mattered was the system, the so-called establishment. It was an institution that often put protocol ahead of people and cared more about image than authenticity. I sensed this almost right away. During my first Christmas as a member of the family, an event that's supposed to be filled with warmth, I actually felt deeply isolated. The atmosphere was tense, the glances exchanged were subtle but clear. It all made it obvious who belonged and who didn't. I recall one particular moment. A senior family member, sounding genuinely surprised, remarked, "We didn't think we'd see you again." In that world, showing vulnerability was seen as a weakness. My own natural warmth felt completely out of place. The pressure was overwhelming, especially as the media, who I'd been told would eventually back off, only became more relentless. Every move I made, every expression on my face, was caught on camera and closely examined. I began to feel less like a person and more like a product. Inside the palace, I was expected to conform. I was supposed to fade into the background and simply play the part of the smiling, silent princess. But inside, I was falling apart. After William was born, I struggled with postnatal depression, but my pain was quietly ignored. I also battled bulimia, a secret illness that grew from my need for control. Instead of seeing it as a cry for help, people treated it as a sign of instability. I reached out for support, but in a system that values a stiff upper lip, my pleas were either overlooked or ignored. To some in the establishment, I was considered a non-starter, someone who did things differently. And yes, I did. Not out of planned rebellion, but because I simply couldn't act any other way. This was just me, being true to myself. I had a say in choosing my son's first names, and when it came to my wedding vows, I chose to leave out the word obey. It may have seemed like a small act, but for me it was essential to preserving my sense of self. I was determined that my children would see a world beyond palace walls. So I set out to give them a more normal schooling experience. I wanted them to witness the rawness of real life. So I took them to homeless shelters, to hospitals, even to hamburger joints. These weren't just trips, they were important lessons in humanity. It was my way of finding fresh air in a suffocating environment. With each act, I quietly claimed my own identity, a refusal to let the system erase me. I was learning to lead from my heart, not my head, because in my head I kept hearing that I was worthless. No matter how beautiful, a gilded cage will always become a prison. For me, the prison was my marriage. The fairy tale had disappeared long ago, leaving only a cold and painful reality. I couldn't deny it anymore. Later, I would say there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. That one sentence summed up a decade of loneliness. The constant silencing I'd endured had finally reached its breaking point. The separation wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was my official removal from the path I'd been on. The chance to become queen was gone forever. The very establishment that first tried to shape me, then judged me when I couldn't conform, was now casting me aside. The pain of that rejection was overwhelming, but in the middle of that hurt I discovered an unexpected freedom. For years, other people told my story for me. Now, with nothing left to lose, I had a choice. I could disappear quietly, just like they wanted, or I could finally use my own voice. I chose to speak up. The Panorama interview in 1995 wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. It was my way to take back my story, my moment to pull back the curtain and reveal the true human cost of living inside that rigid system. I spoke about my depression, my eating disorder, and the lack of support, not to seek pity, but to share the truth of my experience. I wanted to connect with people who had only ever seen the polished exterior. It was during that interview that a new idea took shape. When the journalist asked if I thought I would ever become queen, my answer was crystal clear. No, I don't, I replied. But that wasn't the end. It was actually the start of something new. I knew the role of queen consort was no longer possible. The system had already made its choice. But what they couldn't take away was my connection to the people. I want to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts, I said. This wasn't just a wish, it was a deliberate choice. I decided to redefine my role on my own terms. If I couldn't wear the crown, then I would win their hearts. If I was seen as a non-starter in their world, I would build something new in a world they couldn't fully understand, a kingdom based on empathy and direct human connection. That was the moment I transformed my deepest pain, the sense of being unloved and cast out, into my greatest purpose. Being the Queen of Hearts wasn't a title I was hoping someone would give me. It was a title I chose for myself. My declaration wasn't just words. It was a promise I meant to keep through my actions. If my kingdom was truly to live in the hearts of people, then I needed to go where they were, especially to those who were suffering and forgotten. My humanitarian work became the truest expression of that belief. Traditionally, the royal approach to charity had been formal and distant, but I knew that wasn't enough. True compassion goes beyond cutting a ribbon. It's about showing up. It's about offering a hand, a hug. It's about the power of human touch. I remember my work with AIDS patients. In the 1980s and 90s, the world was consumed by fear surrounding HIV. People with the illness were treated as untouchable. So in 1987, I did something very simple. I shook hands with a man who had AIDS, and I did it without gloves. That single gesture sent a powerful message across the world. People with HIV are not dangerous. They deserve kindness and love. I would sit with patients, often away from the cameras, just to hold their hands. My goal was to use my platform to replace fear with compassion. I took the same approach with leprosy, another disease surrounded by stigma. I traveled to hospitals in places like Indonesia, meeting with patients face to face. I made a point to touch them, to show that these individuals were not to be shunned. For me, it was always about recognizing their humanity above all else. This hands-on approach quietly challenged the more sterile, hands-off protocols of the time. I felt drawn to people society had rejected, because I understood what it was like to be on the outside. Perhaps the most powerful symbol of this work was my campaign against landmines. In 1997, just months before my death, I walked through a partially cleared minefield in Angola. The images were powerful. Me, wearing a simple protective vest, walking a narrow path. Some called it too political, too risky. But I knew that statistics about amputees weren't enough. People needed to witness the reality for themselves. My walk was an act of empathy, a way to help the comfortable world feel the fear that the vulnerable face every single day. It was meant to make people see the true human cost of these weapons. With every hospital visit and every embrace of a sick child, I was building my own kind of monarchy, a queendom where empathy became the currency. Leading from the heart, not the head, was always my guiding principle. This was my response to a system I saw as all head, no heart. Taking back my power wasn't about fighting on the system's terms. Instead, I chose to create a source of influence it couldn't control. My work wasn't just charity, it became my identity. If you look back, you'll see that the Queen of Hearts quote wasn't just a soundbite. It was the mission statement I wrote for myself after the original one, written for me, was torn away. Declaring my ambition to rule in people's hearts was my way of measuring life not by titles but by the love I could give and receive. At my core, I believed this: everyone needs to be valued. Everyone has the potential to give something back. I never became Queen of England. Long before I said those words, I knew the system wasn't built for someone like me. But in the end, I believe I found a different and perhaps more lasting kind of reign. My legacy isn't written in the history books alongside monarchs. Instead, it's found in the worldwide conversation about landmines. That my work helped ignite a conversation that led to the Ottawa Treaty. It lives on in breaking the stigma around illnesses like AIDS, and in the open discussions we now have about mental health. But most importantly, my legacy lives on in my sons. I see my philosophy shine through in the way they connect with people and in their efforts to lead with compassion. By choosing emotional connection over royal protocol, I discovered my own sense of freedom. In doing so, I hope I showed that the most powerful throne isn't made of gold, it's found in the hearts of others. That's a kingdom no one can ever take from you. So how do you notice the idea of leading from the heart appearing in our world today? And what small act of connection could you commit to this week to create your own kind of kingdom? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, every conversation is a form of connection. It's a step toward building something meaningful.